Today, we are going to go there. We are going to talk about all the things that are infuriating you and frustrating you about the dating scene. Can I get an amen? Amen. Yes. We are also going to go there to the questions that you have, the questions that maybe you've been plagued with, the questions you've never received a really good answer to. Questions like, am I really expected to wait to have sex until I'm married? Is that really what we're supposed to do? Also questions like, do I really need to marry a Christian? And does it count if it just says Christian on their dating profile, but they haven't been to church since they were physically dragged there by their parents when they were 6 years old? Today, we are going to go there, but here's what we're not going to do. That's just as important as what we are going to do. You see, today I'm not going to give you my opinions, Krista Ortiz's opinions. I'm not even going to give you Ricky Ortiz's opinions. Today we are going to consult the Lord, the author of relationships, and ask him what it is that they're supposed to look like. For that reason, what I will warn you is that what I'm about to share with you will not be sugar-coated. It may even come across extreme. But here's the truth. Anything the world does put up against the ways of Jesus always will be extreme. But for that reason, here's what I'll say to you is this message is not for everyone. This message is for those of you that are faithfully committed followers of Jesus, or those of you that are miserable enough with the way the current dating season is that you're willing to try something different. I love that the gospel of Jesus is always offering us, beckoning us to something different, something better. Proverbs 14:12 says this, and you'll see it up on the screen. It says, there is a path before each person that what? Seems right, but it ends in death. You see, there is a way that seems right when it comes to dating. It seems right because it's what your friends are doing, what your coworkers are doing. It seems right because it's what you're bombarded with on TV and on subway advertisements. It seems right, and yet it leads you to frustration and heartbreak. The longer you follow that path, the more insecure and lonely you become, and on your worst days, you feel hopeless that you'll never find someone. But again, God offers us another way. Proverbs 3:5 says this, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. You see, God tells us, do not depend on your own understanding. There is a path that seems the right way, but don't follow that, no matter how many people are doing it. Instead, seek my will in all you do, and I will show you how to date. You see, God has a will for all we do, even in how we date. I'll even go as far to say this, that there is a God in heaven who looks down and watches us doing what we're doing, and there's a way that he wishes that we would date. And today we're going to find out what he wishes we would do when it comes to love and dating, and we'll find out the difference it could make if we did it. Cool? Before we jump into it, I would love to pray for us. God, I just lay our own understanding down right now, God. God, I pray everybody in this room that no matter how wise they are, no matter how many degrees they are, no matter how much they think they know, Lord, that we would just right now surrender that, Lord, to you. God, we come to you. We consult you, Lord, the author of relationships, and ask you what it is that we should do. And again, speaking to the difference it can make. God, I pray over the power of my words that they would not be my words, Lord, that they would be yours. And God, I pray also that the words would guide us, that they would guide those that don't have a dating relationship happening, what they should look for. God, I pray also that maybe there's a dating relationship that people are in right now, that God, you want to guide them either towards marriage or you want to guide them towards a wake-up call. God, I pray that we would be open to that. And God, I pray for those of us that are married today, that God, we would just be reminded of how you envisioned love. We found our spouse, but that is just the beginning. So God, I pray that you would remind us of what it is that you desire for us in this area of our lives. God, we pray these things in your powerful name. Amen. Today, I want to give you 5 rules for love and dating. And the first rule is this: don't miss out on the life that you have because of what you don't have yet. You see, the world is consumed with love. Researchers have warned that most people using dating apps are addicted to them, finding that they actually spend an average of 55 minutes every single day swiping. Now, I'm not good at math, but I did figure out that that is over a day of your month that is wasted away swiping. Not only that, 39% check them as soon as they wake up in the morning. Another 48% swipe just before bedtime. And then I found out that 3.99 million of you, I don't know who's in this room that did this, but you guys tuned in to finding the bachelor find his love or her love, right? I know that there's some people in the room, you're Bachelor fans, right? But what that means is 3.99 people watched The Bachelor last season. So that means that we're not consumed just with finding love for ourselves. We're consumed with watching other people find love. But here's the truth, is that God doesn't want us consumed with anything other than him, including love and marriage. In a passage about marriage, Paul instructs men and women with these words in 1 Corinthians 7:29, and they may surprise you. It says this, "But let me say this, dear brothers and sisters, the time that remains is very short. So from now on, those of you with wives should not focus only on their marriage. Those who weep or who rejoice should not be absorbed by their weeping or their joy." What that verse can actually say is, those that weep that they haven't found someone yet, or those who rejoice that they have a ring on it, should not be absorbed with it, focusing only their attention on just that. He says this, "Those who use the things of the world should not become attached to them. For this world as we knew it will soon pass away, it's temporary." And then he says this, "I want you to be" what? "Free from the concerns of this life." You see, this passage tells us that we should not be consumed with marriage even after we're married. Therefore, we should not be consumed in the pursuit of it, right? I would argue the more consumed you are trying to find a spouse, then the more susceptible you will be to believe the lie that when you finally find them, that they will be completing you. But in Colossians, we see that not only do they not complete you, but only in Christ can you be made full. We can't believe the lie that that is the only thing that matters. But what we also see in this passage is that we should be free from the concerns of this life, implying that if you are consumed with marriage, then we are not free to enjoy life to its fullest. Here's what I want you to know today, and it's important, is that your life doesn't become significant when you find a significant other. Your life is significant now if only you were focused on the right things enough to see it. And I'll prove it to you. We can demonstrate this with words on a window. If we were to look into your life, look out at your life, what is it that we would see? Maybe we would see the friends in your life. Excuse my handwriting. We would see the friends in your life that are more than just friends. We would see the friends that have become your family, right? Maybe if we were looking out at your life, we would see the career that you have that provides so much more to you than money. It's given you purpose. Not only that, we may see the promotion you received that you worked so hard for. Well done, you. Or we may see the places you've traveled all over the world. You see there's beautiful things happening every single day in your life. But sometimes you're not focused on the right things enough to see it, and I'll prove it to you. Imagine if we were to write words on this window. These are the beautiful things happening in your life, but imagine if we were to write words on there. Imagine if we were to write just 2 words. Finding love. Notice how if this is your focus, if you focus on this thing, even a good thing, how it blocks you from seeing the beautiful things that are happening in your life. I'll say it again. Your life doesn't become significant when you find a significant other. Your life is significant now, if only you focused on the right things enough to see it. I think of the passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul says to us, do not squander the marvelous life that God has given you. Don't squander one bit of it focusing on the wrong things. You see, your life is important now. Do not be so focused on what God hasn't done yet, even if it's bringing a spouse. Rule number 2, don't wear a mask of contentment. You see, there are those that are consumed with finding love. And then there are those that are perfectly content, never want to get married, they're okay being single. And that's great if it's true. But I would urge you, if you're pretending that you're content, then that's a problem. We hear it all of the time, people saying, I don't need a man. I don't want an old ball and chain. I don't believe in marriage, or I did, but never again. Fun story, when I was a teenager, my daughter's in the front row, so I'll be careful how I say this. When I was a teenager, I, behind my father's back, got my belly button pierced. And I'll never forget when I walked into the tattoo parlor, the man that met me was a 300-pound man, tattoos all up and down his arms, and the words "never again" on his ring finger. You see, this is a posture and an attitude that I can tell you may be found in a tattoo parlor, but it's also found within the church. And here's what I'll say. It's not all the time, but sometimes, oftentimes, it's those that say they don't want to be married that actually want it the most, or they're the ones that are the most afraid. We see this in the story of the Shunem woman. We don't ever get to learn her name, but we get such a clear picture into the unspoken desires of her heart and the lengths she went to mask them. 2 Corinthians 4:11, we see her story, and I'll read it to you. It says this: one day Elisha, the prophet, returned to Shunem, and he went up to the upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her. And when she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you've shown to us. This woman had done really amazing, kind things, and the prophet wanted to bless her. So he said, what can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army? But notice her response and the mask of contentment and gratefulness that she wears. She says this, no, she replied, my family takes good care of me. I'm content. I'm grateful. But later, Elisha asked Gehazi, what can we do for her really? And Gehazi replied, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man. Call her back again, Elisha told him. And when the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, next year at this time, you will be holding a son in your arms. And notice her response. She cried, no, my Lord. Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that. But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant. And at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elisha had said. Don't miss this. When she was asked what she wanted, her first response was to project gratitude and contentment, that she was fully satisfied with her life. And yet behind that mask, there was something that she deeply desired, in her case, a son. What we see in this story is that sometimes our contentment can really be a lack of faith. That sometimes our contentment can really be a front for our lack of faith. A lack of faith that God can rebuild us, that he can restore us. A lack of faith that God can give us a love that is better than the relationships we've had in the past. That God can give us a love that is better than you saw in your own families with your parents. That God can do this. He can give you the desires of your heart even after all these years, after these terrible dates, and even after all of your mistakes. You see, on this day, the woman said 5 words. That's all it took. Don't get my hopes up. Both acknowledging her fears of disappointment, but also, don't miss this, she acknowledged that she wanted it. And only after the woman acknowledged the desire for it to happen did it finally happen. Could it be possible that God is waiting to grant you your desire for love, for a second chance even at love, until you finally acknowledge that that desire exists? It's time to have an honest conversation with God about the desires of your heart and put away that mask of contentment. Rule number 3, pretend she's your wife. Pretend she's your wife. I don't know if you guys have watched the Netflix documentary called Pretend It's a City, where Lifetime New Yorker Fran Lebowitz calls her documentary Pretend It's a City, because she talks about how if she could write a manifesto for the city, it would be pretend it's a city. When you're walking around and there's millions of people walking around and nobody is paying attention to where they're going, she could just yell, pretend it's a city, right? It'd be a perfect manifesto and guide through life. You see, if God were to write a manifesto of how men should treat women, it would be as simple as this: pretend she's your wife. You see, if you think honoring women and respecting women is an outdated, old-fashioned concept, then you're wrong. If you think that it's out of touch in the world that we're living, then what I would say to you is you're right. But here's the thing you need to know is that honoring women has always been countercultural, but Jesus did it anyway. I'll say that again. Honoring women has always, from the very beginning, been countercultural. Jesus did it anyway. And Christian men, hear me say this: you need to do the same. You see, in the times of Jesus, women were inferior. They were worthless. Baby girls were so worthless that they would throw them into the river and out onto the street. A wife even was only 1 to 2 steps above a slave. And yet it is in that moment that Jesus said these words: a new commandment I give to you, love others the way I have loved. And how did Jesus love? One of the ways is he honored women. Peter, a close follower and disciple of Jesus who saw Jesus' interactions with women firsthand, later instructed men with these words that you'll see. In 1 Peter 3:7, he says this: husbands, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with what? Respect, as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. I can hear the men thinking, this verse isn't for me. I'm not a husband. I'm single. I'm engaged. This verse isn't for me, but here's the truth. How can you become a husband who honors your wife if you don't start practicing now, right now, in the way that you date? And I love how this verse tells us exactly how men can honor women. It says this: be considerate, be kind, be polite, be chivalrous even, right? Not only that, it says treat them with respect. This is actually a really interesting word in the Greek. It's not found any other place in the Bible. What that means is a really super special meaning. That word treat them with respect is actually the word assign, grant, ascribe to her honor. What that means is it doesn't matter what type of woman you're talking to. No matter what type of woman is on the receiving end of your honor, she is worthy of it. It doesn't matter how she's dressed. It doesn't matter how many drinks she's had, what she's saying. She is worthy of honor. Ascribe to her, assign to her, grant her honor. She's worthy of it. Why? Because she is an heir with you. What that means is she is God's daughter. She is the Most High's child, and he cares so much about her. I love how Andy Stanley, he's a pastor, he says this: what that means is that when you take her out on a date, God, because that's his daughter, is waiting out on the porch all night long, cleaning his gun, because that is his daughter, and he loves her. But not only that, it tells us this, another reason why you have to honor her. It says this: if you don't, it will hinder your prayers. Let that sink in for a moment. Is that not the greatest tactic of the enemy? To make men believe that the women they're sitting from are not worthy of honor, or that it's an outdated concept. And not only does that affect their relationship with women, it affects their relationship with their God. You see, God asks us, he tells us, he wishes that we would honor women. So I have 2 questions that I want to ask you. One's for the men and one's for the women. The first question is this to the men: how are you honoring women now? And to the women, where have I allowed men to dishonor me in the past? For the men, here's what I want to say to you, is that I want you to look and observe, how are you treating women today? And then take it a step further and say, is that how you want to treat your wife? How are you honoring them now? Again, pretend she's your wife. Pretend she's God's daughter. And then women, how have you allowed yourself to be dishonored in the past? Now, I'll preface this because this is a super sensitive subject, so please, bear with me in this, okay? There are many women in this room and watching online, and you have been dishonored, and you did not allow it. I am not talking about that. My heart breaks for you in that. God's heart breaks for you in that. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking right now about the times you allowed it, that you permitted it, the times where you received those sexually explicit text messages and you responded back when they asked for those compromising photos and you sent them, when the lights went up at the end of the night and you were lonely and you just went home with a warm body. The times where you kept picking up those calls even though you knew that you could do better than that. This point is just as much for you women as it is for the men. You need to know that you are worthy of honor, that you are the daughter of the Most High, and everything in your life would change when you start believing that. Again, pretend she's your wife. Women are worthy of honor. Rule number 4, don't date drunk. Don't date drunk. You've heard of drinking and driving. This is drinking and dating. But as you'll find, this actually isn't about drinking at all. Believe it or not, the Bible, for as old as it is, does a pretty good job of speaking to present day hookup culture. Proverbs 5:15 says this, "My son, share your love with your wife alone. Drink from her well of pleasure and from no other." Woo! Why would you have sex with a stranger or with anyone else other than her? What does it say? Reserve this pleasure for you and her alone and do not share it with another. Let her embrace, intoxicate you at all times. You see, the Bible tells us that we should not have sex with strangers, that we shouldn't have sex with anyone other than our spouse, but it's in this passage that God gives us 2 reasons why, and one of them may surprise you to the core of who you are. The first thing we see about sex in this passage is that sex is to be valued, saying it's to be reserved for your spouse, implying that it's something that's not supposed to be cheapened or carelessly thrown away. It's something to be cherished. I don't have to tell you that sex is not valued in our culture, that sex is not valued in our city. I remember this last summer. Ricky and I, my husband, we took a little ferry ride along the East River, and I'll never forget these 2 men sat in front of us, not knowing we were pastors, jokes on them, and they leaned over the table, and he actually said, "I apologize for what you're going to have to hear me and my friend talk about." And then he decided with pride to divulge all of his sexual escapades that he had done the previous weekend. And here's what I'll say to you is that what he said was horrifying. It was hedonistic. It's something I would never speak out loud in church, but here's the truth. It is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how little we value sex in our culture. From dating rosters to hookup culture to pornography and sexting, we have treated sex carelessly, and that's not how God intended it to be. But not only that, we see in this passage another reason that sex should be reserved. Look at that last verse. It says this, "Let her embrace intoxicate you." You see, the Bible compares having sex to being drunk, saying sex is intoxicating. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you've been intoxicated, but if you have, here's what you know, is that when you're intoxicated, your vision is blurred and your defenses are down. You will spend time in places that you shouldn't for longer than you should. You will spend time with people that are beneath you and are not worth your attention. Why? Because they look better, they're more charming, they're funnier when you are drunk. And the Bible tells you that sex does the very same thing. I want you to look at the definition of the word intoxicate. I truly believe that some of you, when you see this definition and you apply it to your sex lives, you will be set free. You will say, yeah, this is what I experienced, but no longer. Intoxicate means this, to cause someone to lose control of their mental or physical power or behavior, to excite or what? Stupefy, to the point where physical and mental control is markedly diminished. The Bible literally tells us that sex stupefies you. It keeps you in the presence of people that are beneath you, in relationships that you shouldn't have been in for as long as you were. For that reason, I want to talk to the women for a moment, my fellow feminists, right? We want to be strong and independent, but here's what we need to realize is that when we have sex with someone that is not our spouse, here's what happens. The results are is it blurs our vision and it binds us to them. And it robs us of the very power and autonomy that we have fought so hard to possess. And God is saying to us, girls, get your power back. I don't want you to date drunk. I want you to value sex in the way that it should be. Don't let sex stupefy you. Don't let it keep you in relationships that are beneath you. Instead, value sex the way that God intended for it to be. Here are some questions that I want you to consider along this point. The first one is this: how has the misuse of sex blurred your vision in the past? What were the results? Again, maybe it meant you were in a relationship you shouldn't have been in. She wasn't worth your time, but you gave it to her. Maybe you stayed in a relationship too long. How has the misuse of sex blurred your vision, and what were the results? And secondly, what does your action or inaction surrounding sex today say about how much you value it? And what would it look like for you to value it more? What would it look like for you to just take one step towards valuing it the way that God intended, not so carelessly throwing it out for everyone else? Again, this is something to be cherished, not cheapened. And my last rule today is this: don't date a donkey, marry an ox. We've all heard this verse before. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says this: do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. You've heard this verse, I've heard this verse, but do you know what it means? Do you also know why it matters so much more than you could possibly imagine when it comes to finding someone to date and ultimately someone to marry? Today I'm going to tell you. The term yoke refers to a wooden harness that was placed on two animals' necks, linking them together, harnessing them together as they plowed the fields. When Paul said, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, he was actually referencing an Old Testament passage found in Deuteronomy that forbids two animals of different strength and capacity from being harnessed together, saying literally, do not yoke an ox and a donkey together. Why? And I want you to hear this. Because the weaker one would hold the stronger one back. You see, the donkey would never be able to keep up with the strength of the ox. The ox would be forever held back by the donkey's stubbornness and limitation. And Paul is warning us, he's urging us, do not disregard this, because the very same thing can happen in your relationships. You see, like a yoke, marriage forever links us to one person. So Paul urges us to put great thought into who we choose to harness ourselves to for the rest of our lives, cautioning us if we harness ourselves to someone who is weaker than us in the faith, that it will continuously and frustratingly hold you back. You see, though this word was originally for those that were just unbelievers, I will tell you, after being in ministry and being a pastor for 15 years, Ricky and I can say that this is equally important when it comes to not being unequally yoked with someone who is a cultural Christian or someone who is Christian-ish. You know the type? They have Christian on their dating profile, but they haven't been to church in years. If they do come, they don't come often. And I can tell you as a pastor, they don't serve and they don't give. And I dare you to ask them what God is doing in their life, because they will stare at you blankly. Why? Because it's not a relationship. It is a box to be checked. And we see it all of the time, how especially women, hear me say this, women, especially women will say this, but he's a Christian. We'll see men say, but she has Christian on her dating profile. And here's what we watch happen is they date and they get engaged and they get married. And then we watch as the weaker one in the faith holds the stronger one back. You see, this may be hard to hear, but again, I promised you that I would not sugarcoat things for you. But being a Christian should not be the bar of who you date. It's the floor. It's the starting point. You see, it's not enough that they are Christian. What you want is someone who is not only moving in the same direction as you in faith, but someone who is meeting at the same speed and momentum as you. You see, you can harness yourself to a donkey that you'll forever have to force to go to church. You can find yourself a cultural Christian. My goodness, they're everywhere. But they will remain pulseless when it comes to the role of faith in their lives. Or you can find an ox that will help you carry the load and help you fuel your faith, not just yours, but that of your future children for legacies. The choice is yours, donkey or ox. But Proverbs 14:4 says this, but you need a strong ox for a large harvest. You see, who we harness ourselves to in dating and marriage will greatly impact the return we do or do not get in our lives and our faith. So if you want to know if you're dating at any given time a donkey or an ox, I'm going to give you 2 questions. But I'll also say this before I give you these questions. It's for those of you who are married, maybe you're like, what happens if I'm married to a donkey? Well, then that donkey's yours for the rest of your life. But here's what I'll say is, if you're married to a donkey, then you too, you already know. You already know how hard it is to carry the burden alone. You wish and dream of what it would be like to have a spouse that could fuel your faith, that you wouldn't have to drag to church. You know. And so here's the thing that I want to speak to those that are married to a donkey. Here's what I want you to know, is that this word is for those that haven't made this decision yet, to protect them from what you already know is true that I'm saying. But also, the encouragement to you is never underestimate the power of a praying spouse. Get on your knees. The decision has been made. The donkey is yours. But get on your knees. God can move powerfully and miraculously. But again, this word is to protect those that haven't made that decision yet to not do that. But here is 2 questions I want to give you so that you can know at any time if you are dating a donkey or an ox, or it's a very good start. And the first question is this: are they moving me closer or farther away from Jesus? Observe it. How long have you been with them? Ask yourself, since I've been with them, have they moved me closer or farther from Jesus? Am I more like Jesus? Am I more living into the promises of God, or am I not? And then this question that is similar but different. Observe, are they moving closer or farther away from Jesus? That will begin to reveal to you if you're moving in the same direction, but also if you're moving at the same speed or momentum. Paul tells us not to date a donkey, but marry an ox. But here's also what I want to say to a very niche group of people. If you are an Abraham, then I want you to take a step further. I want you to go find a Sarah. Yes, Paul said, don't date a donkey, marry an ox. But if you're an Abraham, go find a Sarah. If you're a Sarah, go find an Abraham. And what I mean by that is in Hebrews 11, there's a passage that shares the legends of the faith. They name them one by one, and there's only one couple there, and it's Abraham and Sarah. And I love the visual of Abraham receiving an award, coming up to the stage, receiving his award for legendary, commendable faith. And there his wife is right next to him, not just in support of him, but because she has her own legendary faith of her own. So for whoever that's for, if you are someone faithfully following Jesus, if you're like, I'm a Sarah, then your job is to find your Abraham. Because there's nothing more immovable on this earth than a couple, 2 people who have their own legendary, commendable faith. To close, I'm going to put these 5 rules up on the screen. These are the 5 rules of love and dating. We have consulted the Lord, and here is what he has said. Rule number 1, don't miss out on what's happening now because of what hasn't happened yet. Rule number 2, don't wear a mask of contentment if it's not real. Rule number 3, pretend she's your wife. Rule number 4, don't date drunk. And rule number 5, don't date a donkey, marry an ox. You see, I shared with you in the beginning that there is a way that seems right, but it leads to insecurity. It leads to frustration. But you see, God is providing a different way. You see, if you were to live out these 5 tips, here's what you would find is that he is providing you with an alternative route. You don't have to walk down that path of frustration and insecurity and heartbreak any longer. He is offering you an alternative route. The question is, will you take it? He's offering it today. Whenever you're driving in the car and you get on a path that doesn't work out well, there's traffic, there's something blocking the path, Google will pop up a little thing that says, we've found an alternative route, and then you have to decide, right? Will you accept it? God is providing you an alternative route in love and dating. Will you accept it today? And as I close, I want to share with you one verse, simple verse, that will tell you exactly what will happen if you did. Proverbs 3:1 says this, my child, never forget the things I've taught you. Store my commands, store these rules in your heart. If you do this, you will live many years and your life will be what? Not frustrating, satisfying, not insecure, not lonely, but satisfying. You see, this verse in the Greek is actually so much more than just the word satisfying. What this means is a life worth living. God is saying, yes, there is a path that seems right, but if you take my path, if you follow my rules for love and dating, I will give you a life worth living, and I'll possibly even lead you to a person worth marrying. You see, God's way is better. Again, he's giving you, he's bestowing to you an option to date differently. And today, will you take it? His way is better.